Okay, so we are happy to have Eden join us back again on the stage, as well as Steve Chang and Mishal Montgomery, who have some amazing backgrounds thinking through integrating their own faith and work and stewarding what God's given them for his kingdom. I want to give you just a brief sense of who they are if you don't know Steve and Mishal. Steve is the founder and owner of Copa Vida Cafe and Coffee, and he's a CEO of Liftoff Coffee and Tea. I saw Steve written up by a San Diego journalist as the kick-ass entrepreneur. But I've heard his story recently on starting and having a vision for what he wanted to do with that company at Copa Vida. And it's truly amazing, and he just has a huge heart for what he wants to see God do through that business. And Mishal, she specializes in public affairs as a strategist and policy advisor. She worked as chief of staff for the mayor and senior policy advisor for the city of Anaheim, formerly served as a deputy on the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors. And talked to her about her story and the highs and lows and amazing ways that she's sought to follow God through her journey as well. And I know her big passion is to see flourishing in cities and integrity in city management. And so we're just so grateful to have both of them here with us today. And I want to start off by just asking each of them to tell you just a little bit about their own story in terms of kind of an overview of why they do this work. Why do they feel called to that? And maybe give one example of how God has leveraged that work well for his kingdom. So why don't we go ahead and start with you, Steve?
Sure. Good afternoon. Steve Chang, as I've been introduced, a kick-ass entrepreneur. I like that better than 40 under 40, because I would have been 1,000 over 50 or something like that.
Or 60.
I'm actually a co-founder. Two of my co-founders are here with me today, Elena, my wife, and Suzanne, my sister-in-law. And they've been with me on this journey since day one. Amazing women of God. I get to be the mouthpiece, but it's our story combined. I immigrated to Korea when I was 8, or from Korea when I was 8. Back then the joke was you move to LA, when you leave LA you finally get to immigrate. But came here when I was 8 years old. That just like almost every other Korean I know, you take on the job, your family takes on the job with the person who picked you up at the airport. So my parents started with a lot of small businesses. So we did everything from wig shops to photo shop to liquor store, all of that. And when I was growing up, I swore I would never, ever own a small business in my life, because I saw how much hard work it was. And I think God has taught me a lesson: never swear that you're never going to do something, because somehow you end up doing that. But this coffee thing is my fourth career. So initially, I was the dutiful Korean-American son who was supposed to become an aerospace engineer, went to MUD thinking that's what I was going to be, and within month one, I realized I was never going to be an engineer. That's not my personality. Then ended up in urban planning as my graduate degree at UCLA, because right when I was graduating from undergrad, it was the LA riots, and that's what influenced me the most. And I saw, I'm getting a little preempt, but you guys are talking about bringing peace to the city, but we were there when it was burning, and it was a horrible thing to see. And so we felt called, my wife and I felt called to do urban ministry at that time. So we were involved in conflict resolution, especially Black Korean conflict resolution, for about 8 years. And then because of family situation, we ended up going back into the family business, helping out, and the three of us worked in a noodle business called Passport Food Group. And our joke was, you never heard of us, but you've eaten us. So if you had an avocado roll, egg roll, wonton skin somewhere in a national chain restaurant, it was our skin that you were tasting. So we had clients from Applebee's to TGI Fridays to Cheesecake Factory to Wolfgang Puck's restaurants. And it was an amazing 12-year experience, but it was one of those things where I couldn't understand why God has led me there, right? So I thought I was going to be in urban planning and doing, urban ministry, that was going to be sort of our calling, and next thing you know, we're doing noodle manufacturing. And then about 6.5, 7, has it been that long? 7 years ago, we sold the business to an equity firm, and the three of us were sitting around going, what do we do next? And our prayer was, Lord, whatever it is, help it to be something where our faith and our work and our family, all of it is in one place. I got tired of being a schizophrenic because I'd had one personality at work, one personality at home, and one personality at church. And it didn't make any sense to me to live life that way. So our prayer was, God, could you kind of put it together? And the great advice I got was, do something you love, and it'll never feel like work again, right? And you're doing something you love, it's going to be passionate, and you're going to be having fun. I love 2 things outside of faith and family, and that's baseball and coffee, and it was way too late for baseball. Someone had already taken the shortstop job at Dodgers, so it was kind of, I guess coffee is the next thing I have available to us. So we started out on a coffee venture and spent a year researching coffee, really getting into it. Spent a month in Europe visiting all the coffee shops that I had read about. Went to Costa Rica for about 3-4 weeks, picking cherries and learning on the farm, the coffee business. And through all of that, we came to this understanding that we wanted to start a missional business. There was a series of 8 conversations that we've had where God showed up, and it was with different missionaries and different people who are doing the work. And when we asked them, what is the hardship in doing missions work or impacting culture through faith? And they all say the same thing. When you go overseas, it's money and the visa. It's short-term missionaries don't work. Long-term missionary work does work. It is effective. But the problem with that is every 6 months or so, you got to come back, either to fundraise or to renew your visa. And every time you go to a country, you get culture shock, and it takes you about 3 months just to get used to that culture. So you're effective for about a month and a half, 2 months, and then you got to come back. And then when you come back, you get culture shock. And then you feel really cruddy because you're now begging for money to do kingdom work. And that kind of sucks. And then you have to go back. And this back and forth is what makes it very hard. So we were kind of thinking through this process and thought, if we had a missional business that missionaries could then use to go out and do their work, and it could be sustainable, they could stay a long term. Because believe me, no matter what the country is, if you're willing to bring in money and invest into a country or to a city, they'll take you in, even in the States. It's hard to get a green card unless you have $1 million and are willing to hire 10 people. Great, we'll give you a green card tomorrow, right? It's that quick. So it's that kind of an open doorway kind of process. So we thought, okay, if we did that for missionaries, this might be a great idea. So we started diving into that idea, and the next thing we found out was 99.9% of missional businesses fail within 6 months to a year. 99.9. Not like some work and some don't. They don't work, right? So we tried to figure out why it doesn't work, and it's because missional business or missionaries make really bad business decisions, right? It's what Eden was talking about earlier. Risk adverse, afraid to make decisions, and then a lack of purpose or clear understanding of what it is you're doing. So we would hear about these businesses that would get created that were saying, well, what we want to do is bless the farmers that we get the coffee from by paying them more than the market rate. Then we want to pay our employees more than the market rate because we want to bless the employees. Then we want to bless our customers, and we're going to charge lower than everybody else charges so everybody can have access. And then you do the math and you go, okay, I'm designing a company that's doomed to fail within 3 months. And then they think, well, if we do that, somehow God's going to change that math. And we build it, it'll be blessed, and everything's going to be fine. And it doesn't. And then they go, what happened? It was God's will, right? And a lot of times it wasn't. It was this lack of clear understanding of why you were doing, what you were actually being called to do, right? So the idea for us was, hey, look, why don't we put together a business? Because one of the values of having spent 12 years in the noodle business was that we got a chance to see how a lot of these national chains work. A Cheesecake Factory opens its doors in any new location. There's a 45-minute to an hour wait day one. Not day two, not a month later, not a year later. Right away, there's success. And how do they do it? It's because they have systems. They've already figured out the demographic studies that need to be done. They already know how many people to hire. They already know what to pay them. They already know what the menu is going to be. It's all figured out. So the idea for us was, can we do that? Can we figure out how to make a business that we can hand off to a missionary that can guarantee a little bit higher percentage of success rate than a failure rate of 99.9%, right? And so that's what started Copa Vida for us. Copa Vida is got double meaning. Copa Vida is a play on a Costa Rican phrase, pura vida, which is the answer to everything in Costa Rica. How was your day? Pura vida. How was your night? Pura vida. But depending on how you say pura vida, it means completely different things, right? And I love that phrase, so we came up with Copa Vida as a play on that. But Copa Vida also means cup of life, and Christ is cup of life to us. And so that's sort of the background behind it. We're not a missional business. I want to be very clear about that. Our proceeds don't go into a ministry or to support missionaries. We're a business, period. And I want to leave it there because I think that's really important distinction. And what we're doing is creating systems, and we have a 10-year plan. First 5-year was figure out what it means to run a coffee shop and profit. Then create systems for the next 5 years, and when we're ready at the end of 10, that's when we're launching. And we are starting to put together those things. We have a pretty good model right now that is pretty exciting. It's in a shipping container that we really believe that can bless missionaries with a business model that can actually be applied and actually have a good chance at success. And so we're about 6 years into that 10-year plan. We got 4 more to go. We have 6 locations now. Last night we celebrated a grand opening down in Carmel Valley in San Diego for our 6th location. We have a roastery. We're going to be bolting on an import business soon, and there's going to be a few more things that are going to be happening that's pretty exciting for us. But all throughout this pathway, God's been pretty clear about what it is that we are supposed to do. But the thing I wanted to kind of mention that I think is kind of germane to what's being spoken about here today, I couldn't make sense of why I was born to a Korean American family living that small business life. And it didn't make sense to me why I went into urban planning, because I ended up doing nothing with urban planning. And then it didn't make any sense to me why I was in conflict resolution, and it didn't make sense to me why I was in noodle making business. Until about 6 years ago, all of a sudden it all made sense. Every piece of those activities and that experience has now come to focus my attention on what we're doing, and now it makes sense. The small business experience I got, I knew clearly what I was getting into when I got into Copa Vida. The urban planning and conflict resolution piece, all I do is resolve conflicts all day long between employees and customers, between coworkers, between investors. That's all I do. It's conflict resolution is my life right now. And then that 12 years of noodle business, which didn't make any sense to me, it makes total sense because I have a deeper understanding of the food business than most other entrepreneurs that go into coffee to start with. So all that came to sort of kind of now this point in my life where like, oh, that's why, right? And so one of the things I want to encourage you to do today is whatever it is you feel like you're at, keep doing it. It can't be a mistake because we have a God who already said, I already know what's going to be. And there's a God who's going to redeem whatever mistakes that you make in your life, and all of a sudden, it'll make sense. That doesn't happen too often in life, but there's a couple of times in life where you go, that's why, and everything clears. Everything clears up, and it's a great place to be at. So that's what I want to encourage you with today. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Michelle, same question to you.
Thank
Kind of
you.
what you got you into.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've just been soaking it up, I'm sure like all of you, all these stories, and been learning a lot and gleaning a lot from today. And I just appreciate the Lindsays and the Center for Work and Faith and Faith and Work. But I grew up in Southern California. My parents are missionaries from India to India. And they immigrated here, $4 in their pocket. My dad came to Central Washington in the early 60s with the one goal of getting training in the United States to take the gospel back to India. Because as many of you may know, that there's no foreign missionaries allowed in India. So my dad and mom are Indian nationals, Christians. 2,000 years of Christianity from Apostle Thomas that came to India. So my parents both their heritage is Christian, but evangelical, part of a reformation that happened in India about 100 years ago. Very passionate about taking the gospel to the majority world, and majority of India, as you all know, is Hindu. And so my dad had a deep passion, and so my whole story in America has been as a missionary kid, growing up, going to churches all across the country, raising support. I'd have to stand in the front and sing "Pass It On" with my siblings. I don't know if any of you remember "Pass It On," but So I grew up, that was my narrative, my life as a missionary kid. Went to Christian school because of faithful American friends that supported us, and learned how to be an American, being American homes. My parents spoke another language. Their native language was another language, and their customs and habits. I mean, I was expected to grow up and have an arranged marriage like my parents and all my uncles and aunts and every single person around me in the Indian culture. And so I grew up very Indian, but in America. And so growing up, I learned American culture just being in American Christian homes. And went on to go to Biola because my dad was the last student of missionary medicine at Biola, and my 3 boys are going to be there. My oldest son is a sophomore there, and my twin boys are headed there for film school in the fall. So Biola is a big part of my life. And I had a professor at Biola. I was a business undergrad because my mind thinks like a business person. I'm always thinking of ideas and creative, and I liked my business classes in high school. But I had a professor at Biola that pushed me into public policy for my master's, and he really explained to me about public policy and what an impact I could make because of the things I was involved on campus and my interest in missions and purpose and vision and business. He's like, public policy is really where it's at. There's a lot of people, Christians needed in this field. It's interesting. He was a city councilman from a local city, and just had his eye on me. And the benefit of a Christian college is you have these Christian professors that just take an interest in their students, and he had no other purpose, no other underhanded motive. He just wanted to tell me that. He saw that in me. And I had one class with him, and that's what he pushed me into. And my career has been largely because of this professor who pushed me. And so I got my master's in public policy, and long story short, got an opportunity to work for a Los Angeles County supervisor. I worked on a political campaign for the mayor of Long Beach. Got interested in politics, but not for a career. Was going to go do some serious work as an academic and after grad school, and then I had an opportunity to work for a county supervisor and basically get involved in Los Angeles County welfare recipients, advising on cases. Got involved with the budget of the county, and Don Kanabe, the chief of staff at the time, hired me, and I'm from Cerritos, and he was a councilman from Cerritos, and liked the fact that I was from Biola. And long story short, I just developed got an opportunity to work full-time and started working, got very immersed in local government and politics, and really, really enjoyed it because of all the trouble that people get themselves into. Whether you're dealing with welfare recipients and you're dealing with the brokenness of our society, generational welfare families, or you're dealing with, public safety and crime and the sheriff's department and law enforcement and the kind of, the cases that you are confronted with, and then the healthcare system, and then, of course, all the economic development that's done and all the business deals that are being done every week in Los Angeles. And so I started realizing there is so much complexity to this county and so much complexity to this city. And as an immigrant's daughter, I just found it fascinating because, I also got immersed into the kind of the elite of LA, the wealthy and the powerful. And my parents, I came home like many of you probably. I mean, my parents were very frugal. My mom stopped at, 17 different grocery stores to get the best prices on onions and cilantro, and, because she's a missionary wife, and we were very frugal. So I lived these, I was already bicultural, as they say, 'cause I lived 2 cultures, and then I lived all these other clash of cultures with socioeconomic classes. I was in the halls of power with very important business executives, and I remember going to Rick Caruso's office and trying to get him in when I worked for the mayor of Anaheim, try to get him to develop in Anaheim, and working with the LA Angels of Anaheim and dealing with their whole deal. And I've been exposed to a lot of important deals, and as a Christian, I really, what really has struck me over the last many, many years, now 25 years in local government, is how often we have a crisis of conscience and a crisis of ethics. You all read about it in the LA Times and things like that, but every day there's issues like many of you have in your workplace. And as a Christian, what became difficult for me is not the typical things, but more of the subtle, contracts and deal making that was happening behind the scenes and overtly. And that has become kind of a very interesting arena for me, learning all that, but also learning how to be a Christian in that space. And I'm still working it out. I still work at it every day. I work at it every week, and hundreds of conversations with people. And my last stint in Anaheim was the chief of staff to Tom Tate, the mayor of Anaheim, who just termed out. And it was my first and my last era, I would say, as a policy advisor. I worked for 4 elected officials now. And Tom was my last because he was the best. And it was because he was he's Roman Catholic and a very, very strong man of God. He wanted to do the right thing when, he said, no, if no one else is looking, And a very ethical man. And we shared a Christian faith. We wanted to do the right thing. But Tom, to the point of ridicule, would do things that I would even advise, do we really want to go there, And he made decisions, and with my advice, I was his advisor, his chief of staff, to the point where the city council turned against the mayor on some crony deals they were planning, and they, out of revenge against him and me, they cut me at my salary. And they put me out of work for 4 months in 2013, and I've told Steve this, and that was kind of, for my whole life, kind of in the narrative of my life, I just kind of had this thing about, I grew up in Southern California, I'm this Christian girl, I'm working as everyone, people like me because I'm pleasant, and I get along with people. I never in my entire life thought that something like that would happen to me. And the council turned and did that, and then they cut my ability to work. I was working part-time. Again, I started working part-time for the mayor of Anaheim because I wanted to raise my 3 boys and have some flexibility, so I was working 30 hours a week, and they cut me to about 15 hours a week. Again, all for what we thought we were standing up for doing the right thing. And so that happened about 5 years ago, and that really, if you have, on the ebb and scope of a career, that was really a turning point for me, because it turned everything I thought about work, and thought about, if you do the right thing, if you work hard, if you pray, if you try to do honest things, the Lord will bless you. And I still believe that, but I was really having not a crisis of faith, but a crisis of how could this happen to me, because I thought that if people saw me as a Christian and saw these things, and then they see this dark thing happen to me, it wasn't a good thing. And the Lord really showed me during that time that it's not all about that. And I needed to figure out what was going on, why it was going on, and I probably knew that I would never have the answer of all the reasons why. But one of the things that I learned was I learned how to pray. And I say that with a little bit of shame, because I became a Christian at 4 years old. I remember the day, my older sister told me about Christ, and I grew up with the gospel, Bible studies in my home. I knew the Lord, I am a believer, and I was a believer, but I learned how to really pray. And I started praying for things in the city. I started praying for things that I had never really invited the Lord into meetings, into a meeting we'd have with the city manager, and somebody would come in, a developer would come in, and I started praying about things like that, just praying that I would be wise, and that the mayor would be wise, and that the Lord would be present. And I was embarrassed about the fact that I had never done that, but it was a secular environment, I was involved in church and all my little things in my home, and my parents are missionaries. We run a mission in India, so I'm busy with all that things, but in my office space, I wasn't really doing those things. And so that really changed my spiritual walk of learning to invite the Lord in and saying, Lord, you are here, you've promised to be with me in the dark valley. And so I just started praying, and I started praying for new council members, because the mayor would say, well, we can't win, and other than politically, we have to win back a majority. And so little by little, election year by election year, we did. And I kept praying and praying, and the Lord brought a councilwoman. I actually prayed for West Anaheim. We had to pick a new district. I prayed for the Lord to bring me. I said, if I could be crazy, Lord, and just ask you that you actually bring a believer. Because that's very rare in politics, especially in Southern California. Someone who tries to live out their faith. It's very rare, and it's very difficult. And the Lord did. And we had a majority back, and my salary and my position got restored. And but what I really learned from that experience was the valley, and I started opening my eyes, and I started praying for the things in the city, the homeless, the people that were marginalized, the constituents that never got listened to, and just started to do, okay, what could I do today? And for all of you who live in kind of the workplace of the mundane, or you drive in and you're sitting in traffic all day and you go into your office and you leave, I started realizing that I needed to pray about all of that. And I needed to ask the Lord to be with the person at the water cooler, and the person I worked with, and the constituent that was just a middle-class resident who had an issue with street sweeping, or a homeless person encamped in front of their house, or something like that. I needed to do my job with excellence and to pray over all those things. And the Lord has shown up in incredible ways. And I termed out with the mayor this last December and started my own public affairs consulting and working with local governments and businesses who need problem solving. But it's been an incredible journey. One of the things I was able to do the last 10 years is produce the Anaheim Mayor's Prayer Breakfast. And so we've a separate nonprofit where we have the residents and business leaders who've never really walked into a church and probably wouldn't walk into a church. They'll come to the Anaheim Mayor's Prayer Breakfast and hear a speaker give a message of the gospel in a winsome way. We'll have an artist. We've had Chris Tomlin and Casting Crowns and Amy Grant, and most of my audience has never heard of these people. So it's really fun for me being an evangelical, and I have a committee. None of them have heard of these people. They go, Michelle, we just trust whoever you bring. And so I've been able to bring artists and speakers and share the gospel. And so we've had about 1,000, 1,200 people each year hear that message. And so I look back, as Steve just said, and I look back at all these different things, my immigrant upbringing, my understanding what the gospel is, understanding what it means to be second generation, frugal, poor. I understand people's experiences. Most of us in LA County are not wealthy. And so I have an empathy for people. And then also the prayer breakfast, I got to help bring the gospel to people that would otherwise have not heard it. And I don't know what that fruit will be. In eternity, I hope the Lord shows us. But I just want to encourage all of you with a couple things. One, about prayer, that just to seek the Lord. He says, if you seek me, you will find me, if you seek me with all your heart. And he promises that to us. And we're believers, and as believers, we know that he has promised us, and he's given us his son. He's given us a reminder that he's with us always. As that song, I love that song, Your Labor is Not in Vain. And then the other thing is about vocation. One of the things I worked part-time for, out of the last 28 years, I've worked part-time for 16 to raise 3 boys. And my husband's a high school band director in a Christian school, so I've always had to supplement our income. So I've always had to work, and I've always dealt with that stress of being a mom and being employed and then being marginalized. All my friends who kind of are living the good life because they've been working full-time and maybe have nannies and things like that, and they've been able to kind of move up in the world of work and middle class, upward mobility. And as a Christian, for me, it's like several people said today, your vocation is what you have in front of you. And, the Lord gave us 3 children. And for me, I found that to be it provided so much clarity for me in my purpose is, okay, God's given me 3 children. I do have a couple of degrees. I do have the ability to work. But for right now, I need to be part-time because that's what God's given me. And my number one job as a person who believes the gospel is to make sure my kids love the Lord as much as it is in me. I want my kids to follow the Lord and to follow Christ and to pursue Christ. And so that's right in front of me. And then the next step, just the other thing I would want to leave with you, especially maybe the women, is and the men, but we're all in different seasons of life. And if I had talked to the 30-year-old me or the 25-year-old me, I would have told myself that just be okay where you're at, because you go through seasons. And right now you're stressed about this X thing at work, but take the long view. 10 years from now, will you really care about this? Do you really care that coworker is doing that to you, or that you got written up and you got a review that was poor? Will it matter in 10 years, and what will it look like how I responded to this? How I respond to this now, look back take your future self and look back and say, what will I want that to have looked like, how I responded to that? And I think that's very biblical. I think one of the things that has really helped me this whole career is the book of Proverbs. And that is a gift that Christians have. And Jesus quoted the Proverbs. And I think that that is a book of wisdom, and it's given people around the world, Christians around the world, this incredible gift of intellect, wise choices, flourishing families, flourishing work, because people have followed wise culture and wise traditions from the scriptures. And so we have that. It's a treasure that we have. And I just want to encourage all of you to just look at your life as, whatever it is right now that you're going through, it's going to go through a phase. And if I had anything to tell myself 20 years ago, it would have been that, to be content and be intentional about what I'm doing. And I'm just really, really grateful that there was nothing like this 20 years ago for me. So I'm very excited about the Center for Faith and Work and what it's doing for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll take time for at least a couple of questions from online. So if we could pull those up, take a look at what we've got. And start at the top here. We've got radical Christians seem to be outliers. How do you encourage or promote risk-taking when you don't see it modeled by staff or older people at church?
Wow.
Ooh, who wants to tackle that one? We got to make this kind of a lightning round for time's sake. So,
I would say really quickly, being a younger person, I feel like you can't. I think the majority of people, most people don't like taking risks. So so that's I think that's true for non-Christians, for Christians, for everyone. There are certain reasons why specifically Christians do not like taking risks, geared towards safety and whatnot. That's maybe a little bit more unique to Christians, but no one likes taking risk. So I feel like we can't just look to staff or older people or whatnot. We have to look to Jesus. At the end of the day. Jesus took crazy risks. He died. He risked his life, right? So I think Jesus has to be Jesus has to be our model. I think, man, there's just so many good passages out there on being radical. I think if you're not radical as a Christian, you really have to question whether you believe in Scripture. Jesus tells us to carry our cross. So that's also, look to Jesus.
For me, there's two things. I think if you haven't seen Outliers, because my experience is actually quite the other way. Most of the most outrageous, radical people that I've ever met are Christians, because they don't have anything in it for themselves to do it. They're taking chances where the value of taking that chance isn't like, I'm going to jump 25 buses on a motorcycle. What do I get? Sponsorship and $1 million contract for the next big thing. But I've met and read about these Christians who are taking these incredible risks, not only with their own lives, but with their families' lives. And for what? To share gospel. And they kind of disappear, right? Their name isn't important, and that's the way it's supposed to be. So I want to encourage you, whoever this is, to go actually do some more research, because there are some radical models out there. The second thing is, there is no such thing for me in terms of seeing risk modeled and doing it. Because it still comes down to a choice you have to make. You can see all the bungee jumping videos you want on Instagram, but when you go to the ledge, that's still you that has to take the step off. and trust in that line behind you, which I think is crazy. I would never do it. But my point being, right, I can see as many of those things and read about as many of those things as possible, but until you take a step of faith, right, it's, yeah, and it's not, the other thing about risk-taking that I kind of want to encourage is, people who just jump off cliffs without looking over first, that's a lemming. You're doing it because somebody else did it, so I'm going to do it too and hope that works. That's not what I think a step of faith is. It's actually looking over the ledge, going, oh yeah, that's certain doom, that's certain death, that's stupid, but I'm doing it out of faith anyway. It's seeing the risk, understanding it, measuring it, and still taking that step. That's risk for me. So I think it's important to read about these things and find those models, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to you. Yeah, you and God, yeah.
Yeah, very good. Let's take this question. There's several on risk here. Let's take the question that's kind of a tie. As a Christian, what are the kinds of risks? Oh, let's see. No, that's one. How is your company different than ones founded by non-Christians? So what's unique?
I guess we can talk about that. I would say, how is my company different than ones founded by non-Christians? I would say it's not really different than ones founded by non-Christians, hopefully, in my opinion. I think, at the end of the day, we want to do work that is really good work. And there are a lot of non-Christian companies that do really, really good work at the end of the day. So, I kind of, Steve was saying he's not running a charity or was it a social enterprise? We're not running a social enterprise with Fisherman Labs. We try to advise businesses, and that means helping them make the best possible decisions. And I don't know that me being a Christian changes that. I want to make the best business. Now, me personally, I can make decisions for my life that are unique, and hopefully people ask me about my faith. And relationally, I can tell them about Jesus. But I think there's sometimes this a little bit of like a naiveness around I want to start this business that kind of like what Steve was saying, where it's like, I'm paying everybody well and paying my suppliers well and these well, and it's a business at the end of the day. And if you can't sustain a business, then you can't hire anybody.
You don't have a business.
Yeah.
The thing that I would add to that, because I agree with you 100%. Operating business, you have to run the business in that way. And it's not a Christian thing to want success or to want excellence. That's the world. The world measures that. In fact, part of the reason why I want to do really well with Copa Vida is that if we suck at what we do, no one's really interested in hearing our story, right? If you want to be a model, be successful not because success is your God or success is what you're aiming for, but it's only when you're doing that people pay attention. Right? It was because God came healing and feeding and preaching and teaching that people went, what is going on over there? And I want to go see more and learn more of that. But I think you have to measure success slightly differently. It can't just come in the form of a profit line. I know he doesn't. I know for a fact that he doesn't just look at his bottom line and say, I had a good month or bad month. A great example is we were opening our 5th location, and it was a horror show. We didn't have the right supplies. We didn't put enough time into training our employees. And we ended up, I went to get a cup of coffee during our grand opening party, during soft opening, and I was like, what is this thing? Right? This isn't coffee. Who made this? Right? And it was like, oh, this is so embarrassing. And, we really had a heart-to-heart with our team going, this wasn't excellence. This was us rushing to market, and some of it is on me, some of it is on you, but we need to be better about this. And I was miserable. And the next day, my wife and I are sitting at our East Village location, sitting there drinking coffee and having breakfast and kind of wondering, did we make a mistake? Did we go too fast? Did I step in ahead of God's pace? Or am I not going fast enough? What did I do wrong? And I'm just kind of sitting there kind of bemoaning, and redefining success or trying to. And then a couple sitting next to us reaches over and goes, excuse me, are you the owners? We're like, yeah. Oh, hey, just wanted to share with you that we're pastors. We were sent here from Scotland, and we were told we were going to be planting a church in San Diego. So we've been sent here from Scotland. Now, I don't understand how, missionaries from Scotland are coming to San Diego, right? It's that's really crazy to think about that. But, they were told when they left Scotland, they were prayed over that they would find a coffee shop in San Diego that would be their home base, and that God would use that place as a way for them to launch their coffee or their church. And that's what they did. So he was explaining to us that they had brought 6 people to know the Lord. There was prayer for healing, and people got healed in the coffee shop. And now they started living room coffee or church, and that church is now 120 members big, and that's in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
That's profit. I can't put that on a that's not getting reported to the IRS somewhere. That's not going in my pocket. That doesn't help me with my bonus package, but that's profit. That, to me, is something that I can eat off of, live off of, sleep off of, sustain myself in terms of going back to work the next day. I mean, I thought I saw somebody from Demitas here, but, they know what I'm talking about. Coffee shops look great, but they don't make money easily. You have to work your tail off to make money in a retail setting. So if you just look at that as your bottom line level of measuring success, then it is very, very difficult. So you have to run it to get to that number, otherwise you can't sustain. But you have to be satisfied with a different conversation about what profit is. Yeah.
I just want to say, I think how God's economy is very different than, obviously, the world's economy. Yeah. And so he operates with missionaries from Scotland. That's kind of the commodity that he operates under. And so in the world today, you open up the LA Times or the Wall Street Journal, and like the college scandal is the big case right now, and we all kind of look at Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman and all these cases, and we love to scoff at them and look at their major mistakes, and obviously criminal mistakes in this case. But then the world is just kind of done with them, We close that chapter and we go on to the next scandal. But God's not done with them. God's not done with any of us. And is in the Christian economy, the prisoner, the homeless, the outcast, the middle-class person who's a nobody, who's never going to make the front page of the news because they started a new startup or didn't. Their husband's a plumber, they've been a school teacher their whole life. But God's going to say, what did you do with what I gave you? Like Matthew 25, he's going to look at, I gave you 2 talents, I gave you this, and what did you do with that? And so in God's economy, he's never done with us. He's redeeming our society. He's trying and using us. We're part of that story. We're the ones unfolding that story, that gospel story. And so it's a very different economy. And for me, it's a daily thing of reminding myself of that. Because you open up the news, you turn on your whatever app you have for your news, and you're accosted with these messages of success means X, money, a promotion, a retirement community to leave in, the status of your mutual fund. You're accosted with that every day, and then you open up the scripture, and it's a very different message. It's not counter to it all the time, but it's a very different message, and it says, keep yourself from lying and from dishonest practices. Whoever wants to love life and see good days will keep their tongue from deceit and from dishonest practices, and will be kind and do all these things, and the world doesn't reward you for that necessarily. And so for me, it's this constant daily thing of remembering that God's economy is those missionaries from Scotland. He's looking after those rather than whether that coffee store gets published in a magazine today and they'll be forgotten about tomorrow. God's still at work. So.